And so when I saw him, I was able to persuade him that it would be important and beneficial to him, because I could offer him protection, to make a statement outlining all of the Kray's activities. And this he did. He didn't, unfortunately for me, know anything about the murders, because by that time he'd long since left them. But he did tell me about the frauds, about the long-firm frauds, and certain other activities that the Krays had been involved in. He told me in uncertain terms that the Krays had threatened his life. And so as far as he was concerned, then it was in his own interest to see them put away, and hopefully for a long time.
On the 8th of May 1968, Nipper Read coordinated a massive police swoop to arrest the Krays and over 70 members of the firm. It was the start of an operation that would rewrite British legal history.
It was all timed for 6 o'clock in the morning. They were all provided with arrest sheets and descriptions of the people that they had to arrest and so on. And of course these were all over the place. They were all over the East End and all over other places in London, of course. And so off we went, and I went with my then deputy, Frank Cater, and some other officers, and we went to Braithwaite House, which was where the Krays were then living. And there we found Ronnie and Reggie in bed, and they were both arrested and taken back to West End Central Police Station. In fact, we were the first team back of all the teams that had been sent out that night. We probably got the easiest operation, I suppose.
Now that the Krays were safely inside, work on the case could begin in earnest. There was still no evidence or testimony that would convict either twin of murder.
What I wanted to do in this operation was not make the mistake that I did in the 1964-65 one. And that was that I thought once the Krays themselves had been arrested, people who'd been victims of their activities would come into the station and say, I want to give evidence. They never did that. And so I learned then that there was this wall of silence in the East End that was almost insurmountable. Once they were all inside, it had been generated from the cells of the Krays and others that now they were all together, they got to stick together. And that if anybody was found to be attempting to give evidence for the prosecution, then certain repercussions would occur and their wives and family would be in danger.
The twins could no longer intimidate. They had become too volatile and too violent.
Albert Donoghue, who was one of the senior lieutenants, one of the big hefty men, his mother came to see me. He'd been arrested and charged, and his mother came to see me at Bow Street Court and said he wanted to see me in prison. And so I went along to see him. And then he told me the story. For the very first time, we got to know what had happened to Frank Mitchell. According to Donoghue, he was taken out into a van on the pretext that he was going to another location in Kent. And once he was inside the van, he was shot by two people that were sitting in the back of the van. And so that was the first murder charge that we preferred.
The pieces were fitting into place. Nipper had evidence against the twins for fraud and murder. But McVitie's killing would be more difficult to prove.
One of the problems is, of course, that if you've got a conspiracy like that where a number of people are together when they commit an act, unless one of them is willing to give evidence of the prosecution, then you can't mount a successful prosecution. And so this was the situation as far as they were concerned. We needed one of this group to come forward. We knew basically what had happened, that this had happened in the basement of this house in Evering Road, but it was a question of getting witnesses. There was one man missing, a man called Ronnie Hart. He was a relation, or it suggested that he was a relation of the Krays, a cousin. And he'd never been arrested in the first sweep because we'd no evidence against him. We managed to trace him, and eventually he was persuaded to make a statement in which he said exactly what happened. And he was the prime witness against the Krays.
One piece was still missing, Cornell. A key witness to the murder had been a barmaid from the Blind Beggar pub. She was terrified of the Krays and steadfastly refused to testify against them.
She had seen who had killed Cornell. She knew him, she actually knew Ronald Kray. And so we began to give her as much comfort and assistance as we could at that time. But we weren't getting anywhere, because at that time people didn't believe that the Krays were going to be held in custody and successfully prosecuted. They believed, as they'd always believed, that they would walk on water again, that they would be able to be acquitted and come back to their usual habits in the East End of London.
Given a new identity, the barmaid was moved out of London to a secret address in Essex.
Eventually, she was persuaded by the nature of the support that she had that she could tell the truth. And in fact, later on in court, she very dramatically pointed to Ronnie Kray and said that is the man that she'd seen in the Blind Beggars public house.
The trial started in January 1969. It was to become the longest and most expensive trial in British legal history, with more people in the dock accused of murder than there ever had been before.
And then I went along to court, rather fresh to it, not having seen them for 3 or 4 years. And what was immediately clear was the changes that had come over them. Ronnie was fat and soft, and was clearly not in control of himself. Reggie was more so. During the trial, we had these awful outbursts from Ronald Kray. If he had any chance of impressing the jury, that chance disappeared with those outbursts. The climax of the trial wasn't the dramatic appearance of witnesses who people had thought would never stand up against the Krays. The climax came when Ronnie Kray was in the witness box himself and was being goaded very effectively by the prosecutor, Mr. Jones. He eventually fell apart and screamed at Mr. Jones, "You great fat slob." Jones just sort of rocked back and let that sink into the jury. Here was the king of the underworld descending to name-calling. And if anybody was the great fat slob, it was Ronnie Kray.